In today's episode of HR Visionaries, we talked to Maureen. Maureen had a very interesting career at Google, where she grew Google France from 30 to 1,500 people. Stay tuned. Welcome to HR Visionaries, where we unlock the secrets of modern HR. I'm Benjamin, your host. Join us as we shed light on today's HR universe with HR leaders and innovators from across the globe. Whether you're an HR pro, a business leader, or just curious about the future of work, this is your shortcut to the forefront of HR innovation. Brought to you by Hired, the AI talent attraction platform. Welcome to the latest episode of HR Visionaries. I'm very much looking forward to my guest today. Maureen, it's great to have you on.
Thank you, Benjamin. I'm delighted to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Maureen, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Who are you?
Yes, so I'm Maureen. I'm a French person based in Paris, and I was born in South Korea. My brother lived in San Francisco. My parents met in Boston. So I have quite unintentional roots and setup within my family. And from a professional standpoint, I worked for the past 19 years at Google, so almost 20 years at Google. And I left the company very recently. And while I was there, I started in a recruiter role. I moved then to learning and development. Then I became an HR business partner. And the last 7 years, I was head of HR for Google France and Google Belgium.
Okay, that's, I have to ask you. So for 19 years, so you were one of the very first employees at Google.
I was, you're fully right. When I arrived in France, we were 30 employees, 30. And when I left, we were 1,500. And globally, I think when I arrived, we were 3,000 employees. And when I left, we were more than 200,000 employees. So I really see the company grew. And I experienced the startup phase, the big business phase, and then the multinational scale. So it was really fascinating to see all the different stages. And from an HR standpoint, it was also very, very inspiring and grateful to participate to the evolution of building the HR team, but also contributing to the growth of the company.
Well, obviously, I can only share my views as a user of Google, but in 2003, it was still like it felt like a challenger to all those things that nobody remembers, right? So stuff like Yahoo and all these search engines that were around. Back then, why did you think, well, joining that company that does something kind of cool, however, there are those established companies already in the field of search engines. Why did you join?
So you're gonna know the full story, and I joined very randomly Google, I have to say. And as you just said, internet was quite new at the time, and I was navigating through the web because I was looking for a job. And obviously, Google was already one of the major search engine on the web, along with Yahoo, Alta Vista, Lycos, if you remember, for those of us who are a bit older. And there was this tab on the Google search web page, homepage, with a link which was mentioning Google is hiring. And I simply clicked on the Google is hiring link, which drove me to the job board of all Google openings globally. And I have to say that already Google was very, very busy to recruit because the company was growing and the staffing team was already very, very efficient. And I applied first for a recruiter job based in London, which didn't work out. And 3 months later, they contacted me again because they kept my resume in the applicant tracking system. And there was a same opening in Paris, which was coming up. And I simply then joined by being reached by the recruiting team.
What did you find appealing back then? Because, with the benefit of hindsight, it's obvious. Okay, well, it was a pretty good decision, but back then it wasn't clear that that Google gonna become such a powerhouse and such an important company.
I didn't know at all the Google business model at that time. I didn't know that it was an advertising company, because that's what drives revenue. And what I really, really enjoyed during my first interactions and interviews was the international setup. As you understood, I have quite some family and some roots globally, and mostly in the US. And I really enjoy meeting with US managers or international managers. I remember I had during the interview process a meeting with a manager based in New Zealand, a meeting with a manager based in the US, obviously some French managers as well. And I think that's why unconsciously drove my decision to join the company, because the environment was quite international, and it was still based in France, in Paris, which is a place where I lived. So that was taking a lot of things: international environment, nice and friendly people, and job being based in France. So yeah, that's why that were the first drivers of my decision to join Google.
So when hiring people for a company like Google, how does it work? So you have to increase from 30 to 1,500. However, you can't compromise on quality, you can't compromise on skills.
So the hiring process is very thorough at Google, and what I really enjoy is that people are very different across the Google offices, but when you go to a New York office, a Paris office, a Singapore office, or a Dubai office, the profiles in terms of mindset, curiosity, kindness, and smart people are really similar. Because I think we hire at Google along 4 criteria. The first one is called role-related knowledge. It's the experience that you have for the job. The second one is general cognitive ability, and it's about your capacity to analyze a problem, to be able to solve it. The third one is about leadership, and it doesn't mean that you need to be a vice president of a company, but how you took decisions in your professional and personal life. And the last one is what we call googliness. It's the culture fit to the company. And it's very important because it means how agile you are and how easy you will adapt to a new manager, to a new team, to a new environment. And people are recruiting along those 4 criteria. They are assessed on those 4 criteria. And ultimately, that works because we hire people who are going to be a good culture fit for the company. We have potential for the company that can grow within the company. And that's why we never compromised on those 4 criteria, because it simply has proven that we hire the right people.
How did you check for those 4 criteria?
So Google is very, very data analytical driven. As a company, we are a tech company built by engineers. It's important to remember that it's a product and tech company that is driving the company. It's not a service company. Then the business model and the clients were developed a bit later, but the very, very core business of Google is the tech and the product. And HR, in a way, is mirroring this mindset, because we really think that any decision, even in HR, must be taken according to data points. And there is an HR lab called HR Analytics in the US headquarters that has been running different studies, analyses, and ultimately came up with those 4 criteria that they really identified as key to hire great people in the company.
I think, when it comes to knowledge, for example, it's that is, I think, for most people not that hard. However, when it comes to leadership and when it comes to cultural fit, I think those are very those are nuts to crack, right?
So what do you mean? That they are difficult to assess, or?
Yeah, indeed. So I think when it comes to skills like leadership, and as you said, not everyone has to be a team lead, but well, even if you're not a team lead, you need to take leadership in certain tasks, for example. So it's not that easy to assess, right?
Totally. And also, one thing that we must acknowledge is that hiring is probably one of the hardest part of HR, because you try to make your decision based on facts and interview feedback that are very factual and data driven again. But ultimately, it's people who hire people. And that's why I think hiring is so difficult within HR. That being said, the way we can assess leadership is about any important decision that you took during your life to try to achieve a goal. And that could be about a candidate. I remember a candidate who didn't have uh, any particular support from an education standpoint from the family, but obtained a scholarship to go and study to a university. That was a proof of leadership, that that person, really made efforts, tried to work hard to obtain that scholarship to go into the university. That could be also another example. Someone was working in an NGO, and what kind of role they had within the NGO. Was it a kind of decision-making role, or did they build the NGO themselves? That was also another proof of leadership, saying that this individual is able to take decision and to make achievements based on decision that they took. And when it comes to googliness, so that was a long debate within the company, because we were saying that it was hard to assess googliness. But ultimately, my very own vision about that was how flexible and agile people will be, because in the tech industry, the environment is changing a lot. For instance, when Facebook was releasing a new product, Google was obviously competing on that product, so releasing new product as well. But we had to build the teams, we had to build a strategy, we had to pivot towards a new product. So we had to be very quick and fast to act. And as such, it requires from teams to be able to be that agile and flexible. And the typical question that we could ask is, give me an example of something that you achieved and you are proud of, and give me an example of something that you failed at doing, and why did you learn from that? Because failing is not a mistake at Google. It proves that at least you tried, but you learned something from that. So that was the kind of question that we used to assess this criteria.
What was the best answer you got on the failing question?
I think there was no good and right answer. I think it was more about the reflection that the people could get about that. And I remember someone telling me, I tried to build my own company and I failed at doing that. But I learned that managing people is at the heart of managing a company. And I learned that about the business model, I should have anticipated some items of the market. And it was really a matter on how the candidate was able to reflect on their failure, learn from that, and do things differently the next time. And it's really a signal of intelligence, that acknowledging that you cannot succeed everywhere, but you took away some learnings and you will build on that. It's part of your experience, and that will make it stronger for the next time you will try.
When you work for an American company and talk to candidates over here in Europe, how do you how do you kind of adopt, given, well, failure in the US is less critical than over here, right? So where people are well, see failing on something as well, very often not necessarily as a learning opportunity, but as a personal failure, while in the US, that's much more seen as an opportunity to learn.
I think that was already an answer by itself. So if someone being asked about their biggest failure and what they learned from there had nothing to say, it was a signal that maybe there were some question mark about the culture fit with the company. Because ultimately, Google is an American company, and if you want to join Google, you must be ready to join an American company with an American mindset. Obviously, Google is being run globally and act locally. That's also an important footprint to have, that each Google offices within their own country have different culture. Thus, there is still a global American culture spread out within the company, within the decision-making process, within the messages, within the personality of the leaders based in the US. And you must be ready to feel good in that environment where we talk about failure, where we talk about what worked well, what didn't work well, what we learned from that. And typically in the way Google operates, even within the business model and the product, that's exactly something that we apply. So you may remember the Google Plus network that didn't work out. It was used and built in order to compete with all the social networks. And it has proven that people didn't use it, and ultimately the product was sunsetted. And we made a post-mortem, what went well, what didn't go well, and what we learned from that. You also may remember the Google Glasses, where we could put on some glasses and have a live or visual experience within the glasses. And likewise, the product didn't work out and it was sunsetted. So I think it's typical of the way Google operates. We launch products which are not fully finished. We launch and iterate, we learn from feedback, we try to improve them. And if it doesn't work, we learn from that.
I was wondering about the following. So having these four criteria makes, of course, a lot of sense. However, there may be situations where there is a conflict. So let's say you said knowledge was the first criteria and the fourth criteria being cultural fit. So how do you dealt with situations like, okay, the person sitting in front of me is a genius knowledge-wise. However, he or she has, well, trouble analyzing his or her mistakes, her failures. How would you deal with that?
So of course, as I said previously, hiring, I think, is the most difficult thing to do. And it's still the most critical thing to do because the companies are based on people. And when you hire someone, you hire someone because you think there is potential, that this person can progress. And as all human beings, we are not perfect. So we think that we can still improve. And that's also a typical Google thing, that we should hire smart people who are smarter than us because we think we can learn from them and we can improve ourselves. Of course, there were some situations where behaviors were not always aligned with the culture of the values. And what was really, really important for Google, and is still very important, is that we have some Google values which are clearly displayed. And we want people to follow these values and to be aligned with these values. So when they join, they take a code of conduct class. And within that code of conduct, we explore and we explain the three values, which are respect the user, respect the opportunity, and respect each other. And throughout your time and career at Google, we are being asked to follow these values. And if some behaviors do not fit those values, that can be feedbacked or reflected in the annual performance rating or the feedback given by the manager, because we think that only with feedback we can improve. And that's why the values are very important to drive the behaviors in the company.
You just mentioned that, well, for a company in the knowledge industry, so to say, people are absolutely essential. How did you deal personally with the pressure to find the best people that can move the company forward? Because if you don't, and if your team doesn't, then the company has a severe problem.
That's why within the HR teams globally at Google, I would say 1/3 of the total HR headcount was only dedicated to recruiters and to staffing. And what was fascinating when you join the company to see that a major part of the HR workforce was only dedicated to recruiting. Because again, Google really believes that hiring is the most important thing to do, to have the right people on board and to focus on hiring great potential to Google who are going to stay in the company. And Google is a great company, and like any company, sometimes we make mistake in hiring people. We learn from that as well. there is a period to test also the potential and the performance and the culture fit of an employee. For instance, typically from a compliance perspective, there are trial periods. So trial periods, the probation period is one way to test an employee. You can renew a probation period if you have any doubt. And in case it doesn't work out, I think it's best to make an end, to terminate the probation period from both parts. What is really interesting that it can happen that employees themselves put a term, an end to a probation period when they think they don't fit at the company. And I remember an employee hired in 2020 that himself decided to put an end to his probation period with Google, and so it was not the right environment for him to stay. So yeah, different mechanisms are in place, and again, you test and learn from that.
What I hear is that, well, at a very successful company like Google, there's a lot of emphasis on, well, the HR teams being empowered, the TA teams being very large. So as you said, 1/3 of the HR team is TA. Why isn't that the case at all other companies? Because, well, Google is very successful. There's a lot you can learn from Google, right?
I think in other companies, the hiring process may not have been as formalized as at Google. What is really iconic within the Google hiring process is these 4 criteria that we test, we assess on candidates, and Google is famous for that. It's public. If you go on the web and you search for Google hiring criteria, you will find them very easily and being explained very thoroughly. So it's a very good lesson that Google put in place for other companies to have such a thorough and robust hiring process. And that probably one of the reasons why Google is so successful on the long run and has grown successfully so well during the last 20 years, because now Google is 20 years. And also it was in a way an answer to a business need, because the business was growing so much that we had to hire that many people without compromising on the quality and the hiring bar and the hiring standards. So that's why this process was in place and was thoroughly followed. And it's a good learning for other companies to do so. But I think many other companies have their own hiring process. To me, it still relates to company values. Ultimately, a candidate joins a company for its mission and for its values. And it should be really exposed and explained during the whole hiring process to ensure that you join the company for its mission and for its values, because that's what will make you stay within the company.
You said you scaled Google France from 30 to 1,500 people. What were the greatest challenges you had to overcome, given, well, that's a lot to digest, right?
I think what was really a challenge was to grow the company with that scale while preserving a very Google culture internationally, but also locally in France, to keep Google attractive as an employer, and also as a hub for internal hires as well, transfers within Google. And it was a challenge because Google, when I knew Google, when I joined in 2005, with 30 employees, was really a startup company. Everyone was accessible. We could join people easily. Everyone knew each other. When I left, obviously, that was not the case anymore. We didn't know the 1,500 employees individually. And I had to try to find ways to get people together within still informal meetings, because Google are also this friendly culture within a lot of informal moments like TGIF, thanks God it's Friday. And obviously we had to adapt some of that. So initially this TGIF, thanks God it's Friday, if I'm taking that example, was taking place every Friday and was only about having drinks after work. And then as the company grew, people became also older, had kids, and couldn't stay at work for having drinks after work. So we had to move that Friday, not every week, but every 2 weeks. And also, adding some content to that because we realized that the information was spreading out everywhere. So the TGIF was not only about having drinks, but also having some informal keynote speaker or business updates, or open to any question that employees could have. And when I left, the TGIF was recorded, run once a month, because every 2 weeks was becoming too much within the scale of Google in France. We had all the VPs on stage answering any questions, and the questions could go from business updates to HR updates to workplace facilities updates. But anyone really felt empowered to ask questions to all the leadership team on stage about anything they had in mind. So that's an example on how we evolved the culture at Google by having it very small and informal locally, and trying to structure it along the way as the company grew in France, for example.
When you work at a company like Google, which continuously works on not the things for tomorrow, but the things for the day after tomorrow, how can you make sure that everyone stays aligned on the mission, that people don't live in a fantasy world what all may happen, but people also focus on their daily tasks?
There are different ways to answer that question. I think I will take from a content perspective. It's really important for leaders to have an aligned vision. And I really believe also about the sentence that vision without execution is hallucination. I don't know if you heard of this one. I'm a big fan of that one. So having leaders who have a clear vision, a clear roadmap, and who are also very clear on the execution piece, because ultimately you need people to ensure that this vision is being executed on the ground. Was very important. So the leadership team was extremely iconic at Google. We were really, really keen on hiring great leaders. That's why the leadership skill was something that was assessed during the hiring process, because leadership is really important to ensure that you convey the right messages to your teams. And the second part of my answer would be about the format, finding the right tool to ensure that communication was spread out, was cascaded, and that everyone could have the same level of information. That's where, obviously, as a tech company, we had the tools in place, the intranet, the recordings, the Google Meets, the Google Chat, and all the shared tools that you may know, like spreadsheet, like document, where everyone can have access to the same document or Excel sheet at the same time, was really powerful. So the technology helped a lot to communicate and to keep that vision live and the messages live for everyone. Plus, I think that's important, the informal get-together, such as, for instance, TGIFs or Town Hall, which creates some connection and live connections to support the messages. Yeah.
When you fast forward 5 years, how would you picture HR?
I think I'm very, very biased person to answer that question, because having worked in one of the biggest tech company globally, I would envision HR being even stronger than what I knew at Google. What I really, really think within the tech companies is that HR is not seen as a traditional HR service, like HR managers in tech industry are really close to their teams, really close to their managers, they're accessible. And I think from a culture and mindset perspective, it's really important to understand that in the tech industry, HR must be close to their clients to build some credibility and proximity with them. And it's not always the case in more traditional environment. So that's why I really encourage HR to move toward that culture and mindset. I'm seeing more and more HR influencer on LinkedIn, for instance, or on Instagram. And I think that's great because they are really trying to demystify what HR is being perceived about. And we need to change that brand of HR being scary, being far away from them teams, being there only to dismiss or to sanction people. Not at all. So that's what I would like the HR teams to moving forward to be perceived and to have such a branding of being there to coach, to accompany, and to be there to support the teams and obviously the business to grow. But it's really important to change that brand of HR and moving toward a more positive perception from everyone. And then if you think from HR challenges and HR perspectives when it comes to topics, I think HR will have to tackle more and more upward and downward feedback, thinking that the new generation being hired is challenging more and more managers, top leadership, top managers. And HR needs to understand that there is this intergenerational dynamic that is in place, and we need to learn from the new generations. We need to take their feedback on board. We need to address that. I read really recently an article about someone who experienced reverse mentoring within the company. So traditionally, in a mentoring process, it's a more senior person that mentors a more junior person. And in that reverse mentoring, it was the more junior person that was mentoring a more senior person to help that person be more aware of how tools, environment, a mindset of a more junior employee is working today. And I found it really, really interesting because it's all about being adaptable, flexible about the new challenges. And we cannot continue to be really top-down and execute only based on manager and top directing feedback, but take into account moving forward reverse feedback, feedback from more junior teams, because that's what the future is like. That's where we're heading to. And the new generation will build the future companies, and we need to be ready to adapt to new cultures and new ways of working.
Well, I think you raise an incredibly interesting point here that, well, in particular in the world of AI, knowledge can be acquired quickly or much quicker than previously, and therefore, well, it's not necessarily the question of whether you know something, but how quickly you can look up things and how rapidly you can apply these the newly acquired knowledge. So I'm wondering, in a situation where, well, seniority is much less defined by age or by company, by the term of how long you stayed with the company, how can companies adopt to that? And probably you ran into many of these situations that people joined Google that were incredibly knowledgeable about a certain field that wasn't even around 5 years ago.
That's totally right. So I think that goes both ways. That of course we must give a chance to more junior employees that really acquire very fast in a very fast way new skills, new environment, has proven to have great track records, become great manager in a very short period of time, and that kind of is new to our world, and we are not used to that. And I've seen some managers being promoted and in a very fast pace because they were just great, and you need to acknowledge that. Not everyone is like this, but when it happens, you need to recognize that. And likewise, I've seen also some more tenured managers, and I'm talking in terms of age. We were in a way feeling a bit left apart because they felt that the new generation was taking over the roles, the dynamics, and the important positions. And I run a diversity and inclusion plan, obviously, for Google. And there was the problematic of aging employees feeling less included in the company and the culture. And that's why I think we still must take into account that both generations are still very performing, are still as important as another one, that we of course learn a lot from more aging people or older people that have been in the company for a long time, or that have worked in a professional life from a long time, and that can teach us a lot. So that's why I think the mindset and the agility must go both ways around, acknowledging that we still need those more tenured people and senior people, and accept that a new generation can learn as fast and sometimes be promoted at similar roles in a faster way.
My last question would be, if you had 3 top learnings that HR teams from more traditional companies can apply that you think, well, that worked very well at Google, and those are perhaps 3 principles that could move an HR organization forward?
I think I would have a first item about manager. We do not talk a lot about how important managers are, but people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. And focusing on your manager, whether they are tenured manager, young manager, managing is not easy at Google, but if you have a great manager, you want to stay in the company, you want to work hard, you want to perform, you are motivated. And if you have a bad manager, the rest follows, and it's true. So that's why it's so important to invest on your managers, on manager development, manager training, manager mentoring, peer-to-peer manager coaching, because managing is hard. It's not something that you are born with as a skill set, and you need to develop that muscle. So really investing on your manager is super, super important. It's what will make people stay, and it's a key area of retention to have a great manager. Second thing I would think about is about I would say this culture of feedback and co-construction. As I said previously, we cannot move forward with a top-down approach, but we need to take feedback from the teams, from more junior people, from individual contributors, to take the pulse of the ground of what's working, what's not working well, beyond traditional feedback survey about happiness and engagement at work. A feedback culture, and one that you really take on board with tools that can enable to have this feedback. Anonymous tool is really important to have these people contributing to building the culture. And a third one I think is critical, and it's not the easiest one, is really having diversity and inclusion strategy in place. It's also one of the key components that will work towards retention of employees. And I'm saying that because the younger generation is really challenging the employer about diversity and inclusion. Within an interview process, they will ask what is a D&I policy in a company. In Europe, there are more and more environmental and social corporate responsibility obligations that are coming up and that are relating to HR. So investing in a D&I strategy with KPI in place, with engagement from the leadership, is absolutely critical for HR and for companies.
Wonderful. Maureen, thank you so much for your time. It was a great pleasure learning so much about how to grow an organization, how to grow how to grow as a person, as a leader. Thank you so much again. It was super interesting to listen.
Thank you, Benjamin, for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
And thanks to all of you guys for listening in, and see you next time.